Well, from the 40-degree desert to the -4 degrees of the UK countryside today on a Monday morning, but beautiful scenery. Absolutely love it on days like today. Now look, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix may not have been an absolute classic. I mean, was it ever going to be? Probably not. But I have to say, I think this has been one of the best seasons that we've had in recent times. So much good stuff to talk about over the course of this season. So much great racing, which is of course what's at the very heart of all of this. And I think although Abu Dhabi is a circuit that is very difficult to generate some of that real excitement that we see at so many other races. I mean, how good would it have been if the season had ended in Brazil on the high note that was? But there we go. So, you know, maybe not the most exciting race in the world, maybe not an absolute all-time classic, but still plenty to talk about as ever, because sometimes what happens off track and behind the scenes is just as exciting, just as intriguing as what happens when the cars are going around the racetrack. And because of all that, as ever, there are loads of questions from you guys that we're going to try and get through today. Welcome to another video. Right, let's start with this one from Kevin Vora. Kevin says, hi, DRS was not available for many laps in the race and overtaking was impossible even for the best team. Does that now say that F1 would never remove DRS in the near future? It was a real shame that that was the case, but I think it really did highlight it that it's a tool that we've got in Formula 1 that's there for a reason, as a bit of a band-aid solution, but we absolutely can't do without it because people struggled. Bottas, with a car that's way quicker than anybody else's at that part of the field, was really struggling to get by other cars. So yes, I think it's probably a sign that right now we're not going to see DRS removed. Obviously the hope is that for 2021 and beyond, with the new regulations, some of the problems that were highlighted in yesterday's race will disappear. So the idea and the hope that everybody is pinning their hopes to, I guess, is that for 2021 perhaps the cars are able to race closely enough, able to follow each other without the aerodynamic problems that we have now, and therefore at that point we could then look at getting rid of DRS. This is quite an interesting one from Martin Bennett. Martin says, ignoring the rules, would teams potentially choose to fit mixed tyre sets, i.e. softs on the fronts or back on the mediums, or soft on the left-hand side, for example? I often hear that it's the rears or the fronts of a specific tyre that are going off. And then he goes on to say, or would the imbalance created outweigh any potential benefit of having a more durable tyre on the corner or side of the car receiving more wear? Absolutely, the teams would do that if they could. And what happens is with any F1 rule, if you had the rules, if it was allowed, you know, within the rules to do it, you would absolutely be analysing in that fine detail, they do everything in Formula 1, which circuits, which race tracks would benefit from having a certain tyre on a certain side of the car, and then how you might set up the car to manage that better. So could you, use your car differently? Could you set it up differently if you had a different type of tyre available for either different sides, or much more likely front to rear? Quite often what you need is a tyre. Certain circuits, for example, Abu Dhabi is a circuit where the rear tyres really are the ones that take all the loading, because there's so much big acceleration zones out of very slow corners, right angle corners, many of them. So the rear tyres take a massive amount of punishment. And it may well be that you might go for something more durable on the rear, for example, than you might need on the front at that particular circuit. So there's, as they do in Formula 1, they would absolutely drill into the ultimate detail of it and find out what's best. But if the rules allowed it, you can be sure they would exploit it. Right, let's talk about Ferrari, because lots of people wanting answers, wanting to talk about Ferrari for lots of different reasons this weekend. We'll pick this one to start with from Helga Koistra, who says, Ferrari can now only be fast on the straights when they get rid of all their downforce. They lost 0.6 of a second in the last sector. Looks like the technical directives have had the effect. So What you're suggesting, and I know you're not the only one to suggest this, is that Ferrari, which had this incredible dominance, particularly in the straight line. Let's sit down here. In a straight line, Ferrari were always ultimately, incredibly fast, much quicker than anybody else, had an advantage that no one else could match down the straights. And and what Helga's suggesting is that yes, they still had a straight line advantage, and other people have suggested this as well, but perhaps now they can only achieve that straight line advantage by taking all the downforce off the car. Perhaps because, and if you were a skeptic, and I'm just speculating here, but the speculation earlier on was all about how Ferrari might be doing something a little bit tricky. Wait, you two. A little bit tricky with something like fuel, for example, or injecting oil vapours to burn, or bypassing the fuel flow meter regulations. And we've had various technical directives come out to clarify some of that. So there was a lot of focus on Ferrari's performance, particularly around their engine or power unit performance. So if you were Ferrari, and let's say if you were a team that was pushing the boundaries in terms of the rules in one of those areas, and then people start to get suspicious about it, what do you do? Because everyone's saying you've got this incredible straight line advantage, it must be down to something dodgy, so they issue the clarifications. What do? Do you turn up to the next race with a car that has suddenly lost all of its straight line advantage, or do you sort of try and mitigate that by dumping a load of downforce so that you silence the naysayers by still coming to the next round with a load of straight line advantage, but doing it in a very different way, perhaps by taking all the downforce off the car, making the car less draggy? Of course, it might hurt your overall lap time, and that's what Helga's suggesting there, that perhaps their overall advantage, their pace advantage, has been lowered or mitigated or lost somehow, but the straight line advantage that we still saw again yesterday in Abu Dhabi might still be there, perhaps just coming from a different source, if you like. So the answer is that none of us really know at this point exactly what's happened to Ferrari. Their performance has been a bit all over the place this season. They've had really strong sections of the season, they've had really disappointing sections of the season. They've made a load of mistakes. But there are definitely still questions around Ferrari's, I don't want to say legality, but around the way they've been able to generate performance, particularly in the second half of the year. So what you do there, Helga, is raise a very good point. You're certainly not the only one to have raised it. In terms of finding an answer to that, the truth is none of us really know, only Ferrari at this point know. While we're on the subject of Ferrari, let's talk about what happened with this technical investigation on Charles Leclerc's car, because lots of people said it's a slam dunk sporting penalty. He's going to get thrown out the race. He has breached a technical rule, so therefore he's got to have some kind of disqualification or race time penalty imposed. In the end, it was a €50,000 fine. I think it was euros, may have been dollars. So what was it exactly? So what happens is the FIA have very strict fuel procedures in the build-up to a race. This is all part of their clampdown on maximum amount of fuel used, the maximum amount of fuel flow. Of course, that's all regulated now. They have to very carefully carefully monitor how much fuel each team is putting into their car, how much is coming out of the car at the end of the race, therefore matching the data with how much in terms of mass, in terms of the two weight differences when they weigh a car before the race and weigh a car after the race. Therefore that gives them a figure of how much has been used, but also they can tie that in with the data they have from their fuel flow measurements and the other sensors that are on board the car. And one of the things they can do is the teams have to put the fuel into the car. They have to declare the amount of fuel that they're going to use for the weekend or for the afternoon 2 hours before the race, but the fuel has to be in the car 1 hour before the race. And that point then it has to be, the fuel hatch gets sealed up. They're not allowed to chill the fuel anymore to lower the temperature. It's sealed in. Whatever fuel you've got in at that point is what fuel you're using for the whole rest of the afternoon. So that's getting to the grid, any warm-up laps you might do, any fire-ups you might do, doing the race of course, and the cool-down laps at the end of a race. You still have to finish the race with enough fuel to be able to pump out for a fuel sample, and the FIA have the ability to take samples or drain a car, do a random check at any point. That's what they did, and they found the amount of fuel that was in Ferrari's car before the race didn't match up to the number that they had declared they were going to put in for the race. Now, it doesn't on the face of it necessarily mean there's some sort of cheating going on, but there are a number of question marks around why on earth or how on earth that could be. It could simply be some kind of clerical error in the Ferrari team. Or, and this is where the skeptics are definitely going to be all over this, particularly given what's happened recently, are they up to something different? Are they putting a little bit more fuel, nearly 5 kilos of fuel, into the car secretly that the FIA weren't supposed to know about, that might get used somehow in some clever system during the race and then won't be there at the end? Total speculation again, but there are so many questions around Ferrari right now. They're not doing themselves any favours in silencing some of these critics. So again, we don't really know the answer, but there are a number of possible plausible explanations for this. Some fairly innocent and just a bit of a cock-up, others much more sinister. We'll have to wait a little bit longer to find out a few more details if and when we get them. Whilst we're on the subject of Ferrari, there's a question on Instagram from Georgie Popchev, who says, hi Mark, not sure where to post my question. You can post it wherever you like. As long as you use hashtag AskElvis, I will find it. He says, but hope to hear your opinion on who should be Ferrari's #1 driver for 2020, given the result of 2019. More points to Leclerc and domination in terms of pole positions. Cheers, Georgie. Well, thank you, Georgie, for your question. The answer, I would say, in my own opinion to that, who should be Ferrari's #1 driver in 2020? I don't like the idea of a #1 and #2 driver. For me, if I was running any Formula 1 team, I'd be doing it on a weekend by weekend basis. And so that would mean that whoever's dominant on a particular weekend, whoever qualifies furthest up the grid, or whoever's running highest in the Grand Prix, or they should get the preferred strategy. They should get the sort of #1 status for that particular weekend, in my opinion. You know, you maximise what you have on any given weekend. If you're prioritising a driver and he happens to qualify halfway down the grid where your other driver's further up the front, what are you going to do? Are you still going to give the guy at the back, you know, every chance to do a better job in terms of strategy, or are you going to maximise what you have available to you that weekend? You know, for me, if you nominate a driver as #1 and you nominate another driver as clear #2, but yes, they know where they stand for the season, but it's pretty demoralising for the #2 driver, isn't it? Unless you've got some young kid, which is only going to happen for a very short period of time before he starts gaining confidence and wants a bit more than #2 status, you're just asking for trouble. You're creating problems within your own organisation. On that subject, Neil Roberts asks, he says, Channel 4 hinted at Vettel possibly doing a Rosberg and retiring in between seasons. If he does, who do you think would replace him? Well, I personally don't think that's going to happen, is the first thing. Who would replace Sebastian Vettel? And I think this is much more likely for 2021. I think there's a much bigger question mark over Sebastian staying for 2021. And by the way, the reason I don't think he'll go next year is he's got an amazing opportunity at Ferrari. Yes, he's got this young kid in Charles Leclerc who's a bit of a pain in the arse for him, but he's also in one of the best cars on the grid. Those opportunities don't come around very often. He has a chance that next year's Ferrari could be a title contender, and that is a massive opportunity for any driver, particularly someone as quality as Sebastian Vettel is. So that's why I don't think he'll go. But when he does go, which could be at the end of next year, for me, Daniel Ricciardo, great fit for Ferrari. He's got a little bit of Italian heritage, great driver. I don't think he would be scared of going up against Charles Leclerc. And I think there is a lot of positives for getting hold of him for 2021 and sticking him in a red car. Right, let's get a couple of questions, not necessarily about the race yesterday, but some random ones that I thought were quite interesting. Let's take this one from Paul, who says, can you explain something about an F1 steering wheel? How are the buttons and display in contact with the car? Is it wirelessly? Does the steering wheel have a battery? Decent question, because it's not necessarily obvious. But actually what happens is when you connect the steering wheel to the steering column, there are some little contacts in the centre of that quick release device that attaches the two together. So the driver pulls back on a little a collar, slots it onto the splines of the steering wheel, but in the centre of that are some very tiny and very accurate electrical contacts. They make contact with the wiring that's running down the centre of the steering column, and that is then how it's connected to the actual car system. So the wiring runs through the centre of the column, and then the steering wheel connects to it. There's no battery in the steering wheel itself, it's just all powered up through those cables that run up the centre of the steering column. That's it. Right, this one from Sander van der Donk says, teams are already complaining about the amount of races, but why don't mechanics rotate with others in the factory at home to keep up with the insane schedule? And that way they could have time for their families. And it seems to me that only the drivers have to be there every weekend and the others can be rotated out and in, right? Not really, no. I know it may seem like that, and there's probably a case that something like that could happen. And if we start extending races, and we're likely to get up to 25 at some point, it may be that we have to start looking at something like that as a model. However, traditionally that's never happened, and the main reason is that there are a lot of relationships that have to happen, that have to be maintained to get the very best out of your driver and car over a race weekend. That means having the same mechanics, the same engineers together with the same driver helps to keep continuity, and it may seem like something that could easily be worked around. Maybe it could, but if you're looking for the tiniest amount, looking for perfection, that continuity is really quite important. You start changing personnel around, you start introducing the opportunity for mistakes or things to be done differently. Having said that, if we have to push towards a 25 race calendar, it's much more likely something like that might happen, and we just have to train up more than one group of, you know, absolutely brilliant engineers, mechanics, team management and all the rest of it. So we'll see, but the more continuity you can keep within a Formula 1 team, absolutely the better it is, the less chance for errors there are to creep in, and that's of course what Formula 1 teams are constantly striving for. Eric says, hi Mark, is there a maximum amount of angle that a pit box can have in relation to the pit lane? Also, are there regulations governing the tools used during pit stops, like wheel gun speed, for example? So, the angle of your pit box is determined by the team, but it's more or less parallel with the garage, because if you create an angle one way or the other going in, you know, to get a faster approach, obviously you compromise your exit from that pit box. So the teams end up favouring a parallel box pretty much in relation to the pit lane for that very reason. It's just, you've got to get it. If you get a quick entry, you can also get a quick exit. If you set it up for a quick entry but compromise your exit, or vice versa, one way or the other, it's compromised. So the sort of fairest balance tends to be having a parallel pit box. In terms of the equipment, yes, there are a number of regulations around pit stop equipment. Things like wheel guns. I mean, one that springs to mind is we used to use helium in the wheel guns because it enabled them to spin faster. That's now banned. Helium's now banned. The jacks, for example, you know, people will say to me, how could we go any quicker than the current modern day pit stop? Probably only by automating some of the processes. So if you had an automated jacking system, for example, that lifted the car off the ground without human intervention, you may be able to shave a bit more time off then, but that's banned by the regulations. So yes, there are some regulations that cover pit stop equipment. You know, there is a number of freedoms within that, and that's where the teams are able to gain advantages. The wheel guns are incredible pieces of kit, formed from a basic gun. It's a Dino Pioli gun from Italy, but then it goes into a process that almost re-engineers it to give incredibly high flow through the back of the gun, which means that they can spin at ridiculous speeds, 10,000 RPM. They give you a hell of a kick. The torque is something like, I forget, but it's something like 3,000 Newton meters of torque on that gun. That is a massive wallop when you pull the trigger. So you know about it. If you pick one up and hit the trigger by accident, it will really wrench the thing out of your arms. So they're amazing bits of kit, but yes, they are governed by regulations like everything else. Right, a couple more to finish, and then I'm going to end the video by giving away that brilliant piece of artwork, the Jim Clark Lotus 49 piece, if you remember, that I put up in the Thursday preview video. Loads of you have entered that competition, so if you have, stay tuned. I'm picking a winner very shortly, but just before we do that, a couple of final questions. Wayne says this one: not sure if you've been asked this before, but how do Red Bull and Toro Rosso have quite different cars? I'm assuming they're designed and developed completely separately. Would it be illegal to field 4 identical cars? Okay, well, it would be illegal for 2 separate constructors to field 4 identical cars. One of the conditions of being entered into Formula One as a constructor is that you design and manufacture certain components of a car yourself. There's a list of components you are allowed to buy or share with other teams. And if you think about the Haas model, that's exactly what they've exploited. They have taken every item that they're allowed to take from Ferrari. They've taken that or bought that from Ferrari as part of their deal. But there are other components, one of which, most significant being the chassis, which has to be designed and manufactured bespoke for your team. Now, Haas don't actually do it themselves. They've contracted that out to Dallara to make their chassis, but still it's bespoke. It's designed bespoke for Haas. It's nothing to do with Ferrari. And that's important. And that's exactly the same, really, although not quite as extreme a version of that model that Toro Rosso and Red Bull have. So Toro Rosso this year have been running more or less, not quite exactly, but more or less the rear end of last year's Red Bull car. And that's how it works. It's a much more financially viable way of doing things. That's the point behind it. And we're likely to see more of it, if we're honest, because what Haas have proved is that you can be reasonably competitive using this model. All right, they haven't had a good season this year, but you buy the right components and you integrate those with good components that you've made yourself, you can actually create a decent car on a much more sustainable budget than you might otherwise be able to do. So I expect we're likely to see more of that. If we see new teams coming into Formula One, it's much more likely, certainly if they're independent teams, to follow a model like that. But if you want to be a constructor in Formula One, you do have to have certain parts of your car that are unique to you, and part of that is the chassis and aero surfaces, which mean you can't just copy the entire car. So the answer to your final question there is, would it be illegal to field 4 cars that are identical? Yes, it would if you're 2 separate constructors. This one comes from Leo Van Archie. He said, greetings Mark, I have been searching high and low for an answer to this question. Why does the F1 coverage not show us the brakes modulation? It does show a linear throttle, however brakes are represented as a clear on or off. Thank you as ever. And you can see from that picture what he's talking about. The on-screen graphics that are overlaid across the halo. He's absolutely right. They show the throttle on the right hand side as a linear percentage of throttle travel, don't they? You see it moving up or down, whereas the brakes literally show whether the brakes are on or off. Why is that? There's a couple of reasons. One reason is that obviously with the throttle you have a very clear 0 position and 100% position, so it actually is very easy to translate that into a graphical display where you show the movement between 0 and 100% throttle, because there's an end to your throttle travel. With the brake, obviously that doesn't apply. There is no absolute hard stop on the brakes. You can apply as much pressure as you're able to do, you know, through the strength of the driver's leg and the system, etc. So it's not quite such an easily definable scale that the brake operates on. However, having said that, it is... Excuse me. Hi. Hi. Hello. That's my wife pocket dialing me on her lunch break, I imagine. So the scale of the brake travel is not as easy to define. However, you could do it. You could, there is a sensor on board the car that shows brake pressure, so you could display that information in a. Oh, for God's sake! Hi. Hello. Should be calling back in a second and guarantee it. You could show brake pressure and show how much movement that is on a graphical scale. You could do that. It's a little bit harder to do. Oh, for God's sake. Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Ah, hello, yeah, I can hear you now.
I was worried I could clearly hear you.
Oh.
For some reason that... how are you doing?
I'm alright, I'm in the middle of recording a video.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so one of the reasons is that it's slightly more tricky to be able to achieve because you've got to interpret the brake pressure data rather than just a simple linear movement. And the other reason is that the teams don't really want you to have that detailed brake pressure information because it's such an intricate part of how a driver drives the car and how he gets performance out of the car. I've worked with lots of drivers who are very secretive about how they use the brakes in their racing cars, about where they feather off the brakes at a corner, at what point they come onto the brakes, how much they come on early, and how that breaking that process down of braking into a corner. Some drivers and teams want to keep it closely guarded because they see it as an absolute integral part of their driving style and how they get the most out of their car. Now that doesn't mean that Formula One couldn't mandate to all the teams to say, look, you have to release your brake pressure data to us and we will use it on the screens. That could happen if Formula One chose to take that route. But the teams would certainly not particularly want to give it up if they didn't have to. So those between there somewhere is the actual reason why we don't have it, and we simply have this on-off type situation on the brake graphic display. But I think it's not something that couldn't be changed. It's just that's where we've ended up at the moment, and it would probably take either unanimous agreement or Formula One just to say this is what's happening in a year or so's time for it to be able to be changed. Right, that's almost it, but I just want to finish on this final question that comes from Mighty Racer. He says, great video. This is off the back of my last video. Thank you very much. Can't believe how quick this season and year has gone. Ask Elvis, hashtag Ask Elvis, will you still be doing videos over the winter break? 100%. Yeah, the season may be over, but one of the things I've loved more than anything over the last, it's nearly 2 years I've been doing these videos now. I've just loved making them. It's been really frustrating for me over the last few months that I've been so busy with other things, filming the Discovery TV show, writing stuff for this book that's in the pipeline. I've taken up so much of my time, along with other stuff as well, that I haven't been able to commit to the videos and the YouTube channel as much as I was doing earlier on in the year. I really enjoyed doing the daily videos, you know, almost vlogging almost daily. Monday to Friday I was doing it more or less, each one with some kind of Formula One twist. I really want to get back to that. So if that's what you would love to see, if you'd like to see more of that, do give me a shout, because it's your kind of support that really drives me on to do these. I enjoy making them, but obviously I want to do the sort of stuff that you guys enjoy. So any feedback, always welcome. I always really appreciate it, so thank you. Thank you very much for all of your questions, not just in this particular video, but over the course of the season as well. We will, as I say, continue it, so keep firing the questions in. I'll keep doing the Ask Elvis videos on a Monday, so don't worry, that's not going to change. But I appreciate them all, so thank you. Now, if you entered the competition this week, the final one of the amazing giveaways from the gpbox.com, stay tuned, I'm going to pick a winner now. Right, congratulations to Kenny McFadden. Kenny McFadden, you're this week's winner. You entered on Twitter. Congratulations, that piece of art is coming your way and you are going to love it. So that's Kenny McFadden. That is at alazif157 on Twitter. I'll message you directly, get your address, get that in the post as soon as possible. But thank you for entering, both Kenny and everybody who entered. Loads of entries, really appreciate them all. Congratulations to you. Thank you very much once again to everybody who's taken part in any of my videos, through comments, through feedback, even if you've just watched them or given them a thumbs up. Really appreciate it. And I hope you can join me in showing some appreciation for the gpbox.com, who supplied all of the gifts that we were able to give away, and to all of their sellers who created them in the first place. They've been awesome, been a brilliant addition to the channel. I think you'll agree on that. So thank you to them. Hopefully more of that, all of that sort of stuff to come. More videos coming over the winter. So if you haven't yet, please do hit subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, tell your mates about what we're doing here, and hopefully we'll build the community and continue it ahead of a massive year, potentially, for 2020. Thanks guys, I'll catch you very, very soon. Ta-ra.